Welcome to the Power of Food podcast. We are so excited to bring you evidence-based nutrition information focusing on addressing the root cause for imbalance. Food has the power to help you achieve lifelong optimal health without the side effects of prescription medication. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other podcast platform. I am Stacy Seslowski, Functional Nutrition Registered Dietitian.
And I am Leah Grace Barrick, Functional Nutritionist.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Power of Food podcast. Stacy and Leah here with a very special guest, Dr. Brooke Scheller. Dr. Brooke is a doctor of clinical nutrition and certified nutrition specialist, specializing in nutrition for alcohol use by leveraging nutrition through gut and brain health. Dr. Brooke has over 12 years of training and experience in nutrition and functional medicine and has worked with both individuals and large organizations building nutrition programs to scale. Dr. Brooke specializes in functional nutrition to support gut health, mood and mental health, and alcohol use. She regularly offers programs to help engage others on changing their relationship with alcohol through nutritional practices. Brooke is also the founder of Condition Nutrition, LLC, a nutrition consultancy that works with startup organizations to create products in the food and supplement space and develop personalized nutrition platforms based on scientific findings and growing health and wellness landscapes. Welcome to the Power of Food, Dr. Brooke.
Thanks, Leah. I'm so excited to be here. I know we've talked about this for a while, and I'm super excited to meet you, Stacy, and to join the podcast. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, we are so excited. And to get started, I would love to hear just how you got into the sphere of nutrition and alcohol and the relationship between the two and basically where it all began.
Yeah. So, I have been fascinated by this topic since early in my studies. I have a family history of addiction and alcohol abuse and mental health disorders. And I actually remember when I first started my nutrition training, I was given a book it was called The Mood Cure by Julia Ross. I'm not sure if either of you had heard of it, but it really inspired my interest in how nutrition plays a role in our mental health, our brain, and things like depression, anxiety, etc. It's always been one of those things that I feel you both probably know from being in the nutrition space. Like, we talk a lot about nutrition for weight loss and for diabetes and for cardiovascular disease, but I think it's still fairly new to think about nutrition for things like our mood, for things like depression, for things like anxiety. We're starting to get there a little bit more, but gosh, I mean, the idea that we can use vitamins and supplements and amino acids and proteins to actually support how our brains function is pretty unique, and I think is something that is under leveraged in the space. And actually what happened last year is I had the opportunity in 2021 to publish a publish a chapter in a textbook on complementary and integrative therapies for substance use disorders. So I authored a chapter on nutrition and supplementation. And I had done some research and some work on that in my past, in my clinical experience and working with folks with a little bit with substance use disorders. And when I started diving into the research, I was just really excited to see that there actually is a lot about how the gut is affected by alcohol, how our brain is impacted. A lot of the things that we think about in relationship to our alcohol use is the depletion of vitamins and minerals, which is quite common. And so through that experience of writing that textbook chapter and actually making the decision to eliminate alcohol from my lifestyle, the two really kind of went hand in hand because I was able to use some of that experience of my writing and some of that knowledge to help support my own experience with eliminating alcohol. So it's been one of these things that, sobriety and this kind of sober, curious movement that has come forth in the last few years. There's a lot of talk about cutting back our drinking and how it's really affecting our bodies. but we're not really talking about it from a nutritional standpoint, right? A lot of it is about the psychological elements and the reasons why we drink. And so what I'm working to do now in some of my work is start to uncover and start to talk a little bit more about the biochemical piece and what's really going on from a gut health perspective, from a brain health perspective, from that functional medicine perspective, around not only what happens when we drink, but how that contributes to things like alcohol cravings and why it might be difficult for us to cut back.
I think this is such a fascinating topic, and I really want to thank you for bringing this to light, because I mean, especially during the pandemic, alcohol is just glorified, and I mean, and we're up against like these huge companies that are, spending tons of budget on marketing, and it's like the thing that people are doing when they're stuck at home. And I don't know that we really grasp the short and long-term effects of not only like binge drinking, but even smaller amounts of alcohol, And so I love to sort of dig into that a little bit and ask you how does alcohol affect our bodies and our nutritional status?
Yeah, so a couple of things there, Stacey, that with the pandemic, there's been some research that was completed last year around the actual stats around our collective kind of increase in drinking during the pandemic. And women alone had an increase of about 41% of how often or how frequently they drink, which shows kind of a huge increase. And I think that some of that is, the nature of we stayed home and our lifestyles changed. But really over the years, I think what we've seen, especially with women, is we're in the workforce. We now have these more stressful lives and families and successful careers. And so that puts a lot of stress on us. And one of the ways to kind of escape from that is by drinking, right? And so, the pandemic kind of coupled with this nature of us always being on, we're just like we were talking about, always on social media, our emails are on our phone. I don't know about you both, but like, I'm like checking my email like right before I'm falling asleep, right? Because it's in my hand.
Yeah.
And so all of this, we don't necessarily really realize how it affects us until we start to pull these pieces apart and say, oh, wow, this has become really a part of my habit. And am I using this for stress relief? Am I using this for, it becomes so habitual that I think we don't even really think about doing it, right? I know I can say in my experience, that's kind of how things ended up for me. And to answer your question around how alcohol really is affecting our body, I think one of the big things that is common that we think about is how alcohol affects our liver. And, we talk about that because it's quite a known thing, right? Someone who drinks a lot has maybe fatty liver or starts to develop cirrhosis of the liver. And this has to do with the fact that the liver, as one of the main the main points of the body where we're breaking down alcohol, it takes a lot of the brunt and the burden of that. So yes, the liver plays a really big role. And Leah, I know you talk a lot about the liver and hormones and how, if the liver is compromised, that affects a lot of different parts of the body, right? So it's not just about, the liver, who cares about it? It'll regenerate, etc. But a couple of other big things that I focus on, one is the gut. And this is something that is not being talked about enough. We talk about how the gut is really the root cause of a lot of the things that are going on in the body. And there's a few things that happen when we drink alcohol on a regular basis to the gut. One is that it changes how we digest and absorb food. So it messes with our digestive enzymes. It changes our acid production in our stomach. It's going to decrease our ability to absorb certain nutrients. So this is part of the reason why when we drink alcohol regularly, we have nutrient deficiencies in the whole gambit, really. All of the B vitamins, vitamin C, vitamin D, most of the minerals are all compromised when we're drinking on a regular basis. The other reason for that is because we're increasing a lot of stress in the body. And so we need more of those nutrients to run our normal body processes. So that's kind of the digestion absorption piece of the gut. The second piece of it is how it affects the microbiome and the balance of the good and bad bacteria in our gut. So one of the things that happens is we're going to have a decrease in microbial diversity. So we're going to have a reduction in our probiotic, our good or healthy bacteria, and likely it can cause overgrowth in things like Candida yeast, in some of those more harmful bacteria in the gut. So we often then create a little bit of this imbalance. The third thing that happens in the gut is alcohol is known to contribute to intestinal permeability, or what we often refer to as that leaky gut. And this is something that, or this is part of the reason why alcohol has effects on different parts of the body and creates an inflammatory response. Even a single drink starts to break down the lining of the gut. So the more that we're doing that, the more that we're setting ourselves up for this really unhealthy balance in our digestive system. And these are things that, may manifest for people as maybe digestive imbalances. So that might be bloating or reflux or other types of irregularity in bowel movements. But as I know you both talk about a lot, is how the gut affects different parts of the body. So does that affect hormones, autoimmune diseases, food sensitivities, and really anything that we can kind of think about? And so what I often say to people is if you are a regular drinker and you have anything that you want to work on, that might be weight loss, headaches, hormone imbalances, you name it, changing your relationship and how often you're drinking can be a really big piece of that puzzle.
Totally.
So
Yeah.
long answer, and we could go on forever. It's really a fascinating subject. And the interlinkage with nutrition is really massive.
Yeah, well, you're clearly so knowledgeable about it. And I also love that I haven't heard, I don't think anyone else talking about this issue. Like, I really think you're the only person who I follow who's really bringing to light, the importance of this and how big of an impact it can make. And I feel like in our society, especially, like even people who, are quote healthy and make healthy choices, like they still drink alcohol most of the time, I would say. And it's not really looked at as, a toxin, which is what it actually is. So people are like, oh, well, I filter my water and I filter my air and I eat fruits and vegetables, but I'm going to have, a couple glasses of wine every night. And you're like, wait, hold up. Like this is actually doing more harm than you realize. And so I think it's so good that you're bringing to light all of these issues and talking about the connection between, alcohol in your gut. And so much is going on, with gut health and when it's imbalanced, what it can affect. And I was also thinking about when you were talking about the pandemic, when, everyone's drinking more and that's leading to nutrient deficiencies, like in those crucial nutrients that we need for immune health, like vitamin D and vitamin C. And that's just, gasoline on the fire when it comes to COVID or any virus, anything that happens to the immune system. So there's so much there. And I'm just so happy that you're bringing all of this, to people and that people can learn from you. And so thank you for that.
And thank you for wanting to share more of this, because it really is one of those things. And I'm sure working in clinical practice, you both can relate to the fact that a lot of times we have clients come in and they're willing to do any supplement protocol and take anything you tell them to take. But when you ask them to cut back on alcohol, they're like, no, right? Because it's become such a part of our lifestyle. Most of us use it to relieve stress as part of our socialization. It's one of those things that I think starts out kind of harmless. We're drinking with friends or, we're socializing. And I know in my experience and in many of those that I've spoken to is it really just starts to kind of snowball, right? That it becomes a little bit more frequent and then you're spending time with more friends who are drinking so that you're drinking too. And then you're drinking after work because you need to kind of unwind and de-stress. And, there's a lot of ways that we can unwind and de-stress that don't include alcohol, right? But most of us are used to the way that feels, like the way that feels. And I think part of what I'm working to do with bringing more light to this topic is I think nutrition's a really interesting way in to revisiting this conversation for people, because many of us don't identify maybe with being an alcoholic or needing to get sober, quote unquote, entirely. But like I said, maybe feel like, I'm drinking too much. I don't love the way a hangover feels. Maybe feel like they have other things that are happening because of it, like increased anxiety and depression and things like that. And so it is definitely interesting when you think about the wellness space and how we've covered so many parts of wellness. We're doing more with non-alcoholic beverages now. And so the space is moving in that direction. But I think there's a lot of work to do here. And I'm hoping to bring more of this information to people to, start to think about how nutrition can be a part of that.
I have sort of like a two-part question for you.
Okay.
Number one is, what do you tell the people who say, well, I just have, one or two drinks per week? Is that something you think is okay? Or do you still warn them against some, disadvantages to that? And then my second part of the question is, and I have my own thoughts on this, but I'm curious to hear you verbalize yours on the argument that, well, the alcohol, relaxes me. So there's some benefits, even mental health benefits to the ability to like have this relaxing experience each night, that calms me down from my stressful life.
So love both of these questions. So the first one is interesting because we kind of almost touched on this earlier, but the idea of moderation, like what even is moderation? We've all heard like drink in moderation. And like I was even reading something earlier today about alcohol ads that's like drink responsibly, but like, does anyone know what that means, right? If you were to like poll people on the streets, they probably would be like, not sure, right? So the actual like moderation as given by the government, for example, is less than 1 drink a day for women and less than 2 drinks a day for men. Moderation is, I think, something that's unique to each individual, right? Because if you are someone that doesn't really have a lot of health concerns and you eat pretty well, you exercise regularly, you don't have any extreme like goals with your health in terms of, you have migraines or you have an autoimmune disease, then I would say drinking 1 or 2 drinks here and there, not a big deal. If you're noticing that they affect your life negatively, then by all means, I think it's good to reconsider that. I do think that for other people who have goals for their health, so whether that is, again, an autoimmune disease, a thyroid condition, they're trying to get pregnant, they're trying to lose weight, they have an inflammatory condition, in those instances, I would say better to skip than to drink. And I know this gets a little bit challenging because for a while we were talking about how, wow, red wine is so good for your cardiovascular system. And I was watching one of your podcasts earlier on heart health, right? And so I think the real question comes down to with moderation is how much are you actually drinking, if you're honest with yourself, right? Because if we're drinking that 5 ounces of red wine a few times a week, I don't think that this is a real cause for concern. The problem is when we say, oh, but I know red wine is good for me, and now we're having a bottle a few times a week, right? Because a bottle is not the same as a glass, unfortunately. And so in those instances, I think it's really important to honestly think about what your true intake is. Now, the second part of your question was, when people say that it helps to relax them. Yeah. I would dive deeper into that response and start to learn a little bit more about what is it about alcohol that helps them relax. Because for a lot of people, what helps them relax and unwind is that they have the ability to check out, right? So it kind of turns off those frustrations. It kind of allows us to like zone out, right? And like escape from things for a while. And I think the challenge with that is, what are we looking to escape from, excuse me? And is it something that we can affect through other means? Is that through meditation? Is that through exercise? Is that through, having a conversation with your partner, which might be hard, but if they're able to do the dishes, then maybe that helps to solve these things, right? So I think some of it is, identifying some of the root issues that are going on that may be kind of driving them to use that as the coping mechanism. One thing that I've learned in my experience through doing this, and I'm just over 7 months sober now myself, is it's about finding new tools, right? Because alcohol is a tool that we use to handle stress or to manage stress. So what other tools can we tap into or start to put into our toolbox? Again, whether that's exercise, meditation, going for walks, talking to a friend, doing something that kind of gets yourself out of that space, because yes, alcohol can help us relax and unwind, but it's most certainly not the only way for us to do that. And so, yeah, I think kind of talking about it and really getting to the root of that. And that's where like working with a therapist or a counselor can be helpful for someone who does like really truly have a habit.
Yeah, I love that answer. And I love, the idea of giving someone new tools, because we live in a stressful world. Like there's no way around it. And if they don't have other ways to decrease stress, and the only thing they know that, like quote, works for them is alcohol, of course they're going to reach for that, right? Because otherwise, they might just boil over. So giving people tools and helping them through it, having them talk with someone is great. And it kind of reminds me of like, when working with nutrition clients, let's say they have like a food sensitivity or something, and you're pulling it out, and that feeling of like, oh my God, just focusing on what you can't have, and then trying to shift the mindset and help them focus on like what they can have and what we can add in, rather than like what you're avoiding or what you're taking out. So focusing on, adding in the mindfulness, the whatever works for them, I think can be really helpful as well, just to deal with that stress. And then the other thing I was thinking about is, I know a lot of people rely on alcohol to go to sleep, and they're like, oh, it makes me sleepy. It helps me sleep. And this is something I hear a lot from people. And maybe you can touch on this a bit more, but from what I understand, it's like, yes, it'll initially help you fall asleep, but the quality of sleep will be way inferior. You won't get into REM sleep, which is that deep sleep that helps rejuvenate you and also helps decrease stress in general. So it's like this vicious cycle of you're not sleeping well, and then you're more stressed, and then you reach for more alcohol. And so it just kind of seems like that, vicious cycle. And, speaking of cycles as well, maybe you can touch on like how nutrition in general affects our desire to drink or our alcohol cravings, because you touched on, alcohol makes us deficient in certain nutrients, but like, does that deficiency then make us want more alcohol? And I know you talk about this on your Instagram, which is great. So, okay.
That's my favorite part to talk about.
Okay.
First, I'll address sleep. And actually, yesterday, there was an article posted on the New York Times about this, about alcohol and sleep. So what actually happens is, this is very common. People use alcohol to sleep because initially it has a sedative effect, right? It helps us relax. It helps us unwind, helps us fall asleep. But what actually happens is, when our body is processing the alcohol and breaking it down to its different byproducts, is that process starts to create internal stress in the system that can then cause disrupted sleep. So this is why a lot of times people who use alcohol to fall asleep find themselves waking up in the middle of the night several times, maybe 2 or 3 a.m. They might find that they wake up feeling like not rested, or that they wake up in a state of stress or anxiety. And some of this also has to do with the blood sugar situation that's happening, which I also talk a lot about on my Instagram. And this is something that's also really important to think about in general when we think about alcohol, is that, gosh, there's a statistic that regular alcohol drinkers, about 95% of them have experienced blood sugar irregularities. This is because not only does alcohol often contain sugar, but it affects basically your blood sugar pathways. So a lot of times when we are used to drinking, when we're regular drinkers, we have these kind of constant fluctuations in our blood sugar that manifest for some of us as cravings. So in addition to that, when our blood sugar changes at night when we're sleeping. So if we drank alcohol, now we have a blood sugar crash in the middle of the night, that can start causing some of those irregularities with sleep as well. So it's definitely something to think about. I know for people who use it for sleep, the next question is always, okay, well then like, what can I do to fall asleep then, right? And, the nature of that is it may be difficult for a little while to adjust to sleeping without alcohol. There are things that people can use that are more natural, whether that be different types of supplements that can help to induce sleep, whether that be things like, shutting off screen time a little bit earlier and maybe more of those more complementary types of approaches. The other thing is that our bodies adjust, right? I know, Leah, you talk a lot about cortisol patterns and how our cortisol affects our sleep-wake cycle and all of those things. When we are used to drinking alcohol, because our cortisol is also linked with our blood sugar, you might have imbalanced cortisol patterns. So you might have kind of a spike of basically your energy stress hormones in the evening. And that's because your body is used to kind of being affected in that way at that time. So it's all based on those patterns, on those habits. We can start to restore those and typically start to improve our sleep in that way. Touching on the craving piece, because this is like the piece de resistance of the work in my mind, because I think we know that alcohol affects our bodies. We know it's bad for us. We know that, we feel like crap, excuse my language, the next day after we've had too much. When we are drinking on a regular basis, the effects that happen from alcohol create patterns and cycles in our system that contribute to us wanting and desiring more alcohol. So I know that this is one of the big pieces, whenever someone is looking to stop drinking is, oh, but I just crave it, right? And a lot of times people will say like, they wake up in the morning, they have the intention like not to drink later, and then like stressful day happens, work ends, it's 5:00. We've all heard it and we've probably all said it, right? I just need my glass of wine to like bookend the day, right? Now, the thing that happens is there's several reasons why we might have cravings. This links back to this blood sugar situation, because again, what happens when we have these irregular blood sugar patterns, here we go. Let's set up the cycle. We wake up hungover, we eat a bacon, egg, and cheese on a bagel for breakfast because we need something with carbs. And then we have, something high carb for lunch. We have sweets because we're falling asleep at our desk at 2 p.m. And what happens at 5? Well, we have another blood sugar drop, right? So of course we're going to be craving more alcohol. We want that pick me up. So one of the big things that I've been speaking about and preaching about is, before you take a drink, if you're looking to quit drinking, if you're looking to cut back or change your relationship, before you take a drink, have something to eat and have protein. Because my guess is that if you have something to eat, you distract yourself for 10 or 15 minutes, you're gonna feel fine. The craving's gonna go away. So it's a little bit of that mindfulness shift along with trying to balance the blood sugar. There are some other ways. There's some supplements and things that can help balance blood sugar, like L-glutamine can be used kind of on this like quick as needed basis. But that's a big one. The other thing, and I don't want to go like too deep into these two other pieces, but to get back into the gut, and I want to touch on the brain and how that plays a role too. When we drink on a regular basis and we create these imbalances in our gut bacteria, we have overgrowth of candida yeast or other types of harmful bacteria. This imbalance in the system can trigger cravings for sugar, for carbs, and for alcohol. And basically the reason why is because these types of bacteria or yeasts actually feed off of those types of inputs, right? And so some of that can actually be the imbalance in our digestive system. I actually just read a study about probiotics and how taking a probiotic can obviously help with improving that balance, but actually has helped with cravings. So that's one other piece that's not necessarily as like quick fix as something like balancing your blood sugar. That's more of a long-term, something to consider as kind of part of your routine if you're looking to change your relationship. And it's important for us to get in a little bit talking about the brain and how that plays a role in cravings, alcohol desires, and the like, because our serotonin, our dopamine, essentially our feel-good hormones, are part of that play a role, excuse me, in that craving situation as well, where when we drink, we get that bit of a dopamine hit that then kind of gives us that feel good. So when we do have certain nutrient deficiencies and things like B6 or B12, folate, vitamin C is another important one for dopamine, that can be part of the craving situation as well. That can also be part of the reason why people who drink often or who have cravings to drink also experience anxiety or depression, or other types of mood disorders, because those neurotransmitters also play a role.
So fascinating. I feel like I could literally listen to you all day.
I'm like, I just stop talking and let you guys talk.
No, it's amazing. Don't stop.
It's, it's just really fascinating. And it's something that we're all doing, and we're kind of all, as a society, taking part in this and not really recognizing, these more like internal biochemical things that are happening. It's really, really cool.
And it's
like, just like you said before, it's like such it's actually a really sensitive topic for people, like, because people do not want to hear the negatives of it. They do not want to give it up. They will hold on to it, like, no matter what. Is there one thing that you would even suggest to, like, us as clinicians to use as a tool to I don't want to put fear into people, but what is it that would, I don't know, get them to sort of make a shift?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, as every, nutrition client is unique, I think this situation is also just as unique. So, some people are at a place where, they recognize that this is more problematic in their lifestyle, or that it is having an effect on their health. And then maybe they're more likely to want to make a change. One of the big things that I've found, and in a lot of the conversations that I've had, is having a community and learning from others in this space is really, really helpful. And so, if you have a client who you maybe are thinking, maybe this, is kind of moving into gray area drinking and is something that maybe should be considered, there's many resources out there. I think part of the challenge up until the last few years is most people don't identify as alcoholics, and they're not going to walk into an AA room, right? Until they're like at a real rock bottom, right? But the problem with that is that most of the people who have problem with drinking, they might not have a DUI, and they might not have lost their job or these other things, but it's still affecting their life negatively, right? So I think just by providing some resources to clients, whether that be some of the books around, there's a ton of them now that have come out. There's one from 2019 called Sober Curious. There's a great one from 2020 called Quit Like a Woman by Holly Whitaker. And that's a great one that talks about more about the alcohol industry and how it's like a feminist move to quit alcohol because it's like another way of keeping women like, quiet, for example. And so there's a ton of books. There's a huge presence on social media. And, I think it's changing a lot where you don't have to identify as an alcoholic now to want to change the way that you drink. And I think this sober curious movement and things like Dry January are really great ways for people to kind of toe into cutting back and giving like a chance to seeing how they feel without it. Because most of us are in such a blur, especially if we drink on a like regular enough basis, several times a week, several drinks a week. We're in a blur. Our brain is fogged out. We're not thinking clearly. Our guts are messed up. And so it takes a little bit of time for us to like take it out of our system before we start to go like, oh, ooh, like, wow, that was really affecting how I feel. That was for me. I mean, I was having like massive anxiety, major anxiety. Like I would rate it a 9 out of a 10. And now my anxiety is about a 1 out of 10. Right? Just by that one simple thing. And so I think it opens up, so much more for us. We want to exercise more. We do want to eat healthy. We're not, getting fast food or kind of these quick grab things because we feel yucky. And I think we live in a world where we're all stressed out and we're all looking for ways to feel better. And this is like one thing that we could change that can have a huge, huge impact on how we feel.
Totally. And I love the concept of, I love the concept of helping people, just trying to, I don't know if convince is the right word, but just taking a chance and being like, okay, just try it for 2 weeks, just see how you feel. Because I think for a lot of people, like even in clinical practice, Stacey, I don't know if you've, noticed this, but like, when you say something like that, they think, oh, I'm never going to be able to drink again. And it's like, no, that's not true. But if you're drinking, every day or many days during the week, you just have no idea how you're possibly going to feel without it. So I think just like kind of dipping your toe in the water and just trying to help people understand, like, this is just a trial period so that you can try it out, see how you feel. And then, ideally, hopefully once they feel better, it'll be more motivation for them to cut down or cut it out, whatever works for them and their bodies. So yeah, that's great.
And it can be scary for people. Like if you are drinking every day, for example, it's part of, again, it's part of a coping mechanism. It's part of a way that we release stress or kind of are able to, again, like escape a little bit from our lives. And we live in a stressful time. There's a pandemic still happening, I think. And like, the world seems to be falling apart most days. Don't watch the news. Like that's one of the coping mechanisms. I think it's really a lot about, helping people find those resources, right? Because for a lot of us, and I know in my experience, when I first stopped drinking, like it was all I thought about, right? Because I was like so used to drinking. I had to kind of constantly find ways to like stay engaged around like the positive element of not drinking. So like I read a ton of the Quit Lit books. I was doing a ton of research. I was following people on social media and, watching videos about people talking about their experiences in not drinking. So it's one of those things that, it may require a little bit more, maybe as a clinician, creating like a guide that has some resources for people to access would be helpful, because it is kind of one of those things that it like takes a little bit of a village, because it's a big change. And for some people, it's so woven into their lifestyle, their relationship, their job, all of that kind of stuff. It can be a little bit uprooting. Whereas, again, taking supplements and things like that may not be as drastic of a change.
Yeah. I love it. It's like, this is such an important topic. I honestly wish that I would have listened to this kind of topic like years ago, because I just think back to like all the years that I spent like drinking way too much. And I know, like for me, since I pretty much stopped, now when I try to even have just a little bit, my body does not tolerate it. Like now I just feel my heart racing. I feel like I can't sleep at all at night. I, just notice even from the smallest amount what it's doing to my body. And I can only imagine what it did when I was drinking more, on a nightly basis. So.
And that's a great point. Actually, one thing that helped me towards the end of my drinking is I had gotten an Aura ring, like that measures your heart rate. And I wouldn't wear it if I drank because it was so, honestly, my heart rate, basically what would happen if I drank even 1 or 2 glasses of wine or something, my heart rate would go up and it wouldn't drop down overnight. So on a night that I wasn't drinking, my heart rate would go up to like, 70s, 80s. And then when I was sleeping would drop into 60s, sometimes into the 50s. And what would happen if I drank is my heart rate would go up into the 90s and stay up like all night. And
That's
I was
crazy.
looking at that going, it's not good. This is not restful sleep, A. B, this is totally stressful on my cardiovascular system, right? So some of those like data points for me helped as well. So that's another way to think about, how people can get a little bit more engaged and really understanding like how it's affecting their body.
Totally. Yeah. That is definitely motivation to have that like objective. It's similar to like lab testing, in practice. So that's super interesting. Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah.
So you touched on how alcohol affects our gut, affects our liver, affects our brain. I would love to hear your take on how alcohol affects our hormonal system.
Yeah. And I think I had suggested this too, because I know that you're talking so much about this on your Instagram too now, Leah. A lot of it's through these indirect systems, right? So our blood sugar affects our hormonal systems, right? It affects our cortisol, it affects our sex hormones and the like. The other big thing is our liver. So our liver helps to produce and store and turn over those excess hormones. So when our liver is not functioning properly, oftentimes we'll see that estrogen will go up. We're not having kind of that natural process of elimination from the body. And the other thing is the gut, right? So when the gut isn't functioning, when we're not having normal bowel movements, we are likely still holding on to and storing some of these excess hormones in our system. So this can manifest for people, in all different ways, whether that be, irregular periods or if it's a woman nearing menopause, maybe more extreme menopause symptoms. This is also part of the mechanism by which alcohol increases risk for breast cancer because of the excess estrogen in the system. So alcohol is linked to several different types of cancer, but one of the strongest linkages that is in the research is with breast cancer. There's a great Instagram account called Drink Less for Your Breasts, and I just love it. They talk all about alcohol and how it relates to breast cancer. And so that's, it's really, really important to consider as a woman how this is affecting our hormones, especially if you experience any of those hormonal imbalances. If you've got a history personally of breast cancer or a family history of breast cancer, really important to consider that. The other thing that I wanted to mention there, I totally lost my train of thought as I was talking. Nope.
Is it coming? Well, if it comes back, you can definitely jump in. But
I do this thing when we're talking because the questions are so complex that I'm like, oh, hit that next. Oh, here it is. So the last thing I want to mention about alcohol in relation to hormones is there was a really interesting study, and I believe it came out last year on how alcohol impacts fertility. And so I know that this is a big one because some women will stop drinking when they're preparing to get pregnant or trying to get pregnant. Others will, still be drinking on a regular basis. And what they found in the research is that it was basically dose dependent. So the more alcohol that you were drinking, the lower the chance for fertilization. So it's important to think about for women who are looking to plan a family or are thinking about that for the future, to think about how they can start to manage that. Or, if they've been having trouble trying, that can be a piece of the puzzle too.
Thank you so much for all of this information. I think I'm going to want to re-listen to this like 4 times so that I can really verbalize these things to my patients. And I think you're making a big impact on so many people who are just, either not aware of the effects of alcohol, and even in the smallest amounts are having an effect. So thank you for what you do. Is there something that you want to just get some advice you want to give as we close up?
Yeah, so I would just love to say I'm working on a lot of different things on this topic. A couple of exciting things which I can hopefully announce soon. But I post a lot of this information on my social media. I am doing a little bit of client work, so specifically with people who are looking for maybe more support in this avenue and want to do that on more of a one-on-one basis. I also run some sobriety groups. I have basically a members only platform where people can kind of come on and join the conversation around using nutrition to help with changing their alcohol relationship. I'm just closing up a dry January program right now and looking to launch in February an alcohol and gut reset course, so people can do that kind of on an asynchronistic. So if you feel like you're listening and you want to learn more about this, you want to maybe try to use some of these tools to help improve your gut and change your experience and cravings and all of that kind of stuff, go ahead and follow me on Instagram and do all those good things. Get on my email list on my website, because I'll be sending that all out there. So I love this topic. I just think it's very exciting for the space and the industry to have more tools for people to feel good. That's really what it's all about, right?
Definitely. Well, we're so lucky to have you, Dr. Brooke, and I'm so glad that this worked out. Definitely go give Dr. Brooke a follow on Instagram. She is like so good at reels and all the things. So, do you want to tell everyone how to best find you?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram at Dr. Brooke Scheller. It's DrBrookescheller. I know this is audio, so that's funny. And you can go and find me at my website. It's brookescheller.com. And as I mentioned, go ahead and sign up for my email newsletter there, and you'll get some info on upcoming programs and all of those fun things. And otherwise on Instagram, you'll find me posting reels and commenting on Leah's reels, because I feel like she's really catching on to it. And Stacey, it was so good to meet you.
You as well, and I'm going to be following you from the second this ends. And
on social media.
I know.
We'll get her on there.
Following you, and I'm going to be calling you for help with social media, because I certainly need all the help.
I'm here.
Oh my gosh.
So glad to be here. Thank you both so much.
Awesome. Just so everybody knows, my name is Stacey Sizlowski. I work with Heal From Food is my company. You can find me at healfromfood.com, and my email is Stacey, STACY @healfromfood.com. And Leah, there you go.
Awesome. And I am Leah. You can find me on Instagram at Grace Functional Nutrition, and my website is gracefunctionalnutrition.com.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, ladies.